We have a great forum here tonight. We have a lot of good speakers. Again, this is something that we're putting on from the Central Suburban Youth Football League. It's the North Shore League that's been in existence for many, many, many years. It's all local. There's football programs at Lake Forest, Glenview, Deerfield, Highland Park, Evanston, Wilmette, Winnetka. So all the Niles West, Niles North. There's many different programs that are part of this football league, and we want to see that football league grow and continue to prosper with building young men into the business. The first speaker that we're going to have tonight, he comes from USA Football, and USA Football, we have quite a few programs within our league, the Central Suburban Youth Football League, that are part of USA Football. We've been part of USA Football for the past 4 years, and every year that we get recertified and we see what USA Football is doing to try to keep the football program safe out there, it is unbelievable. I'm telling you, the first year that I went 4 years ago, there wasn't too many people that were involved in it, and now, last time I went, there's so many different football leagues that are part of the USA Football structure and that are now USA Football certified. It's growing. You see the commercials on TV. And I see it only getting bigger and bigger. Really happy that he's with us today, Anthony Stone.
This is Heads Up Football. I'm also a teacher, okay? I'm a physical education teacher with a master's in special ed. I like wearing shorts every day. I got 18 years until I retire. I know people laugh when I say that, but I'm gonna be sad in 18 years, okay? With USA Football, it's about educating coaches. If you look at the chart, you see how when you're heads up and when you're not, how things go down. For example, 77% reduction recorded at practice, 57% reduction time lost, 38% reduction during games, 34% during concussions in practice. Now remember, because, and Dr. will tell you, because of the findings, because it's such a small subset, it's not really accurate, but you see what the accurate is. Okay, you see how it works. Heads up really works. At the high school level, the high school one's coming out in about a month. The high school one, this one was done in 2013 at Fairfax County. What they do is they had 43% decline in concussions of 3,000 football playing student athletes. That's pretty amazing. Numbers don't lie. Concussion recognition response, heat and hydration, sudden cardiac, equipment fitting, practice planning. Those first 5 things right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all talk about safety. First 5 components of Heads Up Football are all about kids' safety. You're building the kids' confidence up. I only have 5 minutes to talk to you about this. Okay? After today, Central, the Suburban Youth League, they are all Heads Up certified. That's outstanding.
Okay. Good to see all of you, and I was asked to give you a little overview about concussion. We've been at the concussion problem for some time, and I'll kind of take you through an overview of what we think we've found out and where we are with concussion and understanding the brain. And I always say that, you know, it seems like there's a drumbeat of media attention and reports, and of course parents and many others getting concerned about concussion. I think part of it has been good. Other parts of it have led to some assumptions which probably aren't accurate. The NCAA was founded over 100 years ago when President Teddy Roosevelt realized that there were 19 deaths in college football at that time. That year, 1905, there was no NFL at that time. And he got all the presidents of major universities together and he said, look, if you don't change the way the sport is played, I'm going to abolish football. So that really was the beginning of the changes in the recognition of the serious injuries that can occur. And through the last century, you can see that there were many, many epochs of our understanding about caused by motion or a blow to the head. It results from brain movement inside the skull. 90% occur without the player losing consciousness, so that's been a big source of confusion and why it's hard to make the diagnosis. As they say, it's an injury you can't see. And brain scans are usually normal, and so if a patient or an athlete gets taken to the emergency department and gets a CAT scan, and then they're told by the physician that it's normal, well, it's supposed to be normal because with concussion there's no bleeding or swelling. but it makes many people think that there really wasn't an injury when there can be. There's many things that we've discovered in the last decade. In fact, it's said that we've learned more about concussion in the last 10 years than we ever knew before. And this is one of the most important things here. This is called the metabolic curve of dysfunction. And it shows that in the first few minutes after concussion that there are alterations in the ions in the brain, in the neurotransmitters, maybe lactate accumulating in some places. But in almost everyone, it returns to normal in a few minutes. But in the few percentage that it doesn't, that's where we think the brain is vulnerable to a second impact. And that's why if you suspect a concussion, the prudent management, of course, as we all know now, is to remove that player from further impacts. Sports concussion, you know the symptoms: headache, sometimes just feeling in a fog, confusion, balance problems, sleep, work, or school difficulties. You know the sports that are involved, and certainly concussion does not discriminate between the genders, because particularly in female soccer and ice hockey and basketball, they have very high rates of concussion. And what happens in concussion is that the fibers, the brain is moving around inside the skull. I did 2 brain surgeries today, one this morning, one this afternoon. In both of those cases, you see that the brain has about a centimeter of movement, and that the brain is able to move. It floats inside the skull. So when the head suddenly stops, then the brain sloshes around, and that can tear fibers and that can stretch fibers, as you see here. We've also learned about the critical first week, and that is that about 90% of all concussions resolve in the first week if the player is taken out of harm's way. But there are about 10% or so where the symptoms and the effects of concussion. Now, the other thing is that we learn not only the metabolic and cellular changes which can occur, the stretching and tearing of fibers, but we also began to learn 10 years ago that the acute effects can translate into longer recovery time, and then each concussion can take longer to recover. We also began to realize that it wasn't just the immediate effects of concussion, but the potential for long-term effects. And that's been seen in these publications published in JAMA and others about the potential for prolonged effects. So hitting your brain, hurting your brain is not good for anyone. It takes longer to recover, and so I believe we need to work to continue to take head contact out of all these sports as much as we can. But when we can't, and when they invariably occur, then we need to... So sports concussion is really managed with a team concept. We have a great team in North Shore that combines all specialists, whether it's orthopedics or neurology, neurosurgery, primary care, sports medicine, psychology, neuropsychology, and it's a team approach nowadays. There's a lot of changes coming in concussion. As you know, all 50 states now have laws which determine concussion, how they're managed. The concussion management involves a lot of things, but primarily identifying it, pulling the player out. We depend on neuropsych testing such as this to identify whose brain is not functioning normally, and this is a mainstay because if we get brain scans, if we do a neurological examination, all those are typically normal, so we depend a lot on these tests.
So there's several different baseline tests you can do out there. There's Axon, which uses playing cards and flips them, and you have to remember different things about it. There's a BEST test, which is a balance test, which is useful in some ways. There's a brain network activation, which is a skull cap with electrodes that kind of measures your brain activity, which is kind of new, and there's not a whole lot of research on it, but it's gained popularity. And there's King-Devick, which is another test that is about reading numbers that are spaced differently across the page that kind of test your eye movements and your vestibular and ocular system. So they each have their little niches. Probably the most popular one is impact. And through those 6 tests, you come up with composite scores of immediate memory, delayed memory, reaction time, and processing speed. And those are helpful in themselves. They give a lot of information to doctors on where the problem is and what accommodations might be needed. So it's a good test, but it's not a great test. We don't really have a great test for concussions. They're working on a blood test, but that's probably a few years off. So just want to make clear so parents know what impact is not, and it's not a test that definitively tells you that there is or is not a concussion. So why kids need it? Kids aren't always honest with us, especially at the high school level. Maybe a little less with younger kids, but younger kids really don't recognize the symptoms as well, and they don't report the symptoms as well. So it becomes helpful with that. Resolution of a concussion doesn't always go right in line with symptoms going away, and that's why we use the test to make sure that we're functioning back to normal, or at least as best we're able to. The return to play, this is a pretty standard protocol, and of course rest is first. We want to rest and get rid of the symptoms, and then once we're done with symptoms and we want to get a person back to play, we want to have a day of light aerobic activity, whether that's on the bike or walking. It increases their heart rate, and that we don't have any symptoms with that. Then we want to go to a little bit heavier aerobic activity, some calisthenics. We want to get their head moving, some specific conditioning type things, which increases their heart rate and their blood pressure and gets their head moving. So we're kind of increasing the stimulus and making sure that that doesn't bring their symptoms back. The next step would be a non-contact sport-specific drill. So we're getting them moving, and there's a little cognitive load. They've got to think about what they're doing as it relates to their sport. And then we go to full contact practice, which restores their confidence and kind of assess that they're really performing the way they should. And then they're back to competition. So parents and kids think that's a long time, but it's really not, because many times these activities trigger symptoms, and you need to take a step back and really make sure that their concussion is fully healed.
Those were two excellent talks, and I'd also like to commend you all for being here. I know it's an evening, and it shows your interest. I just want to review some of the common injuries that an orthopedic surgeon sees related to football, and just talk about terminology. Obviously, with Google and the internet, you can find out most of this, if not more. But I feel like if you leave here and you understand just a few terms and some of the common injuries, then maybe I'll have done a good job for this. In football, unlike hockey, we usually are a little more specific. It's not always just lower body, upper body injury. The lower body I'm going to talk about some knee injuries, and I'm going to talk a little bit about shoulder injuries. So what's the most common? Well, the most common injuries in football are knee, shoulder, and ankle. So what are the common terms or names for injuries of these structures? Well, very specifically, an injury to a ligament is a sprain. And any injury is, in some extent, a tear, but the actual technical medical word is a sprain. Injury to muscles or its tendon attachment are called strains. And orthopedic surgeons aren't really very sophisticated. We're kind of small, medium, large. So 1, 2, 3 works for us. So basically the grading system is fairly straightforward. It's small, medium, or large. 1, 2, or 3, mild, moderate, or severe. And we'll talk a little bit about that. How do you treat it? Well, many people don't need an ACL. We can live normal lives in terms of walking, biking, swimming, doing straight ahead activities, and some people can do fine with just therapy and activity modification. Another group of people can do okay with just simple bracing. But for the most part, if people are going to engage in sports, cutting, twisting, pivoting activities, they need surgery. There's often a difficulty with young people because if they tear their ACL before their growth plates close, there's a very difficult situation where you have to look at, do you do surgery to try to avoid the growth plates, or you wait until they close? And there's a great deal of interest and controversy about how to time that up. It's very hard to stop a kid from being active. Switching quickly to shoulder injuries, we see a lot of different shoulder injuries, bruises, fractures. Most common fracture in the shoulder is the clavicle at all ages. Sprains, again, injury to the ligaments, dislocation, subluxation, labral tears, and rotator cuff injuries, which are quite unusual in children, but I've treated several in high school football players. Why does the shoulder function as it does? Well, it's a ball and socket joint, but it's a bad one. It's like a golf ball and a golf tee, which allows great mobility, right? We have tremendous flexibility of our shoulder, but it's not very stable. One of the most common football injuries is for the shoulder to dislocate. And every year at the NFL Combine, so 350 kids come in, there's probably between 30 and 50 that have had surgery for instability. I guess the Buffalo Bills first-round draft choice this year. Just ended up having surgery on his shoulder. They took a gamble on him, and he dislocated in the first first minicamp practice. The shoulder moves by big muscles, your deltoid, and it's held together by your rotator cuff. So it goes ball and socket, ligaments that hold the shoulder on, and then the rotator cuff that moves it. What's a shoulder separation? Shoulder separation is injury to the ligaments that bind the collarbone to your entire shoulder. So basically your shoulder blade. There are ligaments between the collarbone and the top of your shoulder, and there are ligaments that suspend it. When you land on your shoulder, it's driven down, and it can cause injury to these alone or all of these, and that allows the collarbone to pop up. It actually looks like it pops up. Actually, the shoulder sags down. So the collarbone's level if you took a picture with the other side. But this is a classic injury for quarterbacks, getting dumped on their shoulder. It's also super common in hockey because guys get boarded and their shoulder gets squeezed down. But very, very, very common in football. In a dominant arm in a quarterback, it can be a big deal. So that's separation. Dislocation is ball and socket joint injury. So again, the ligaments hold the ball and socket joint together. When the ball comes, here's the ligaments, other word capsule. When the ball comes off the socket, the most common way is down and forward. It's called an anterior-inferior dislocation. Ones to the back are much less common but do occur. And football happens to be one of the major areas where they can occur. We see it repetitively in football players and linemen because they do a lot of blocking like this. They lift weights like that. So they put a lot of, instead of going that way, it goes that way from an arm outstretched. This is what an x-ray looks like when the ball's not in the socket anymore. Rotator cuff are the muscles that hold the shoulder. It literally cuffs the shoulder. There can be traumatic injuries to the rotator cuff. This is what an MRI looks like. There's a gap here because there's a hole. And rotator cuff injuries occur infrequently in football, but they do occur. And I have seen several high school football players that have torn it. So you have to keep an eye out for it. And that is my quick tour of the knee and shoulder.
I think I may be the only person who hasn't played football before, but I will tell you I was in a commercial when I was 5 and I wore a football uniform, so I think that counts for something. But on a more serious note, I kind of want to echo what everyone else has already talked about. One of the things as primary care sports medicine, we do a lot with prevention. And so we're doing a lot of these talks, and I'm dragging my fellow physician friends with me to these talks. But I think, so much relies on education, educating you guys, but educating the parents and educating the kids about safety issues and about everything that goes along with concussions. That's certainly on the tops of everyone's mind when they come in to see me in the office. And I will tell you that I still encourage people to play football, and I tell them, look for coaches who have heads-up training, look for people who have taken that extra time to learn the proper techniques, because I think that makes all the difference in the world. So again, I want to thank all of you guys for taking the time out of your already very busy schedules and all the things that you already do to come and just listen to us. So thank you. About kind of some of the common sense things about what do we do with our kids when they're sick, and when is it safe for them to exercise, and how can we keep them healthy. A lot of what I do is also sports performance. So what can we do to even make them better in a safe way? So these are just the things that we're going to talk about. So not too many things like I promised. So the first thing is fever. So one of the very few things that I'll tell people to not let their child participate with is a fever. So really, if your child is sick, they should not be exercising. And there's lots of reasons for it. The main 2 reasons are that it puts more stress on the heart. So when the temperature is elevated, it makes the heart work harder, so you have more stress on the organs themselves. But also it increases the risk of dehydration. So if you have symptoms above the neck, usually you're okay to exercise. So think about a fever is what we would call systemic, meaning it affects the whole body. Okay, I have a little bit of a cold, but I can still exercise because it's just above the neck. But if I was wheezing, or I had any symptoms in my chest, or if I was having any gastrointestinal symptoms, those would be reasons, again, that we don't want the kids to play. So these are just simple things that you can remind parents. Again, you don't want them sending them to practice and getting the rest of your team sick or you sick. So this was something that was devised by a team physician at Oklahoma many years ago, and we all talk about it still to this day. 2% of dehydration can impair your performance, and it increases your risk of injury, and also it increases your risk of heat illness. So we think about these little football players, they lose fluids a lot more quickly, and also kids aren't as attuned to knowing if they're thirsty. So their thirst mechanisms don't kick in as well as we as adults. So they can't recognize that they're thirsty or that they need to drink. So we as coaches and as parents need to, again, be encouraging frequent water breaks, making sure that they stay hydrated. A simple thing, if you can't get them weighed, tell the kids to look at their pee, which again, kind of give you a funny look, but their urine really should look more like lemonade than apple juice. So if kids are coming in and they're having really, really dark urine, that can be a sign that they're dehydrated. So making sure that we're educating our kids to kind of keep an eye out for that through both pre and post. So before a meal, making sure to really buff up on hydration. Really, some kids have sensitive stomachs, so we'll talk about keeping it low in fat and fiber so they're not feeling too upset in their stomachs. And high in carbs. Carbs get a really bad rap these days, but athletes need carbs, so it's okay. They should eat carbohydrates, and that's really to maintain their blood sugars, and that sugar is what gives us the energy when we're exercising. Protein is good. I know that there's a bazillion protein powders out there, and everyone supplements with protein. Most people in the United States get more protein than they need, so unless your athlete is a vegetarian or has some sort of special diet, they don't really need to be supplementing. I tell people that when you're doing protein powders, it's just making really expensive urine. So you want to make sure that ideally they're getting their protein through normal foods, and ways to do that are things like chocolate milk. I think that's like the best invention ever. They have those little cartons, you can throw it in their bag, in their backpacks. Chocolate milk tastes good, it has protein, and it has carbohydrates, so that's a really simple thing to give your kids. And also don't let them eat something they're not familiar with before a big game, because you don't want them having to run off the field. During exercise, really avoid dehydration, so frequent fluids every 10 to 15 minutes, avoiding stomach upset, salt for those who cramp, and then fructose is a sugar that can sometimes upset people's stomachs, so if you have someone who's having some trouble, just kind of look at what they're eating, look at food labels on what their snacks are. And then post-event, I already told you, chocolate milk is the answer to everything, and rehydration. So if you can get some fluids in them, get some chocolate milk in them, ideally if they can have a meal right after practice or within that hour, that's helpful to help their muscles repair. If you know that you're not going to be able to get a meal because you have to drive to your other child's event or whatever, then it would be okay to do something like a protein bar or a smoothie or something like that. But ideally, a real meal and sitting down with the family and eating if that's possible. If your next event isn't for a couple of days, you don't have to worry so much about getting stuff in really quickly, but you want to make sure that you're replenishing as soon as you can. And then sleep. So none of us get enough of it. I don't know, maybe my 15-year-old, she seems to sleep a lot, but most of us don't get enough rest. And so rest is so important to recovery. So again, encouraging your kids. I think it gets really hard as they get to the high school and collegiate levels because they're pulling all-nighters and things like that. But if we can teach good habits at the younger levels, that's when our body's allowed to repair itself, to replenish. And so if we're not allowing for that, and certainly if we're not allowing for rest days from our practices and our activities, so kids are overscheduled these days, and so they're going from your team to a travel team to another team, and so making sure we kind of teach some common sense to our parents as far as allowing for some fun days. We don't want kids to get burnt out, and so we want to let them have a day off from their jobs. And then kind of that leads into avoid overdoing it. So this is a real kid who his parents did this to him. They were overtraining him basically, but it's real. Kids are getting burnt out, and so I think remembering that sports should be fun, and I think we all probably believe in that. We're here and we're interested in keeping kids healthy, but remember that we want to keep them doing this. We want them doing it for a lifetime, so we don't want to burn them out when they're 10. And so really encouraging good, healthy habits for a lifetime is really the purpose of all this. And the teamwork and the camaraderie that they get from being on football teaches more life lessons than what game they won on Sunday.
Thank you for having me as part of this great panel. These doctors and trainers, they're the reason that this sport's coming around, and I think it's going to be saved, to be quite honest with you. And I know what you're thinking when a coach gets up here and talks about football and safety. You're going to say, they're going to say it's safer, of course, because they're a football coach. I've been coaching now for 21 years. I've been head coach in high school for 21 years. I know what you're thinking there, too. He looks a lot younger than he does for someone who's coached 21 years, and I appreciate that. But I truly believe this game is as safe as it's been for a long time. We've seen a lot of different things happen over the years, and the two reasons I believe that is the education piece, which the doctor just talked about, because of the panel like this, because of the coaches more knowledgeable, the parents more knowledgeable, and the kids more knowledgeable. And also because of the way that the coaches have changed what we do and how we coach. Brian's going to hit on a lot of things of how we've come around. Things have changed a lot over the years, tremendously. I started coaching college and then I went into high school. You know, water was used as punishment. You know, you went triples. Everything that we used to do is gone. And I think this is trickling down into the guys that are out here right now in the youth program, and that's what we need to see for the kids. Brian is going to talk about a lot of things that we have done and we have changed over the years, and a lot of it's been the help of, you know, USA and some different things that we have noticed at clinics and things ourselves, and from listening to the professionals like we're doing tonight. My son plays in this league. He's a 6th grader, and you can't turn on the TV, you can't turn on the radio without hearing about football and injuries and concussions. We're knee deep into it right now. And I think that because the kids are more educated and they're coming to us and telling us that they're hurt or that they might have a concussion or their ball was wrong is a big step in all this. It really is. I think that because for me, I have Tom on the sideline. As soon as that happens to me, I say, Tom, he's yours. And I back away. You know, I coached at a school in the south suburbs before I moved up here to Columbia North, and we were the trainers. We were the doctors until game night. We taped everybody. We gave them ice. We did everything. And it's come a long way, even at the youth level. I know that the coaches are more knowledgeable and able to take care of those kids as well. So my son will here and go over some things that we do from the high school level a little bit more in depth with a PowerPoint that he's put together.
In this area, I was getting questions from day one with parents. You know, how are you going to keep my kids safe? You know, how are you going to reduce concussions at this school and so on? And I can honestly tell you, I talked to Dale right away off the bat about what were our concussion numbers, what did things look like, how are we going to reduce these things over the coming year. And our first year was really good. We talked about how we're going to do that and so on, but we were able to track that, reduce the concussions in the first year significantly. Our first concussion at our varsity level was in week 7, which we thought was outstanding. I mean, we don't want to have any, but we're always shooting for that, so the later in the season it gets, obviously we're doing things the right way. And then this past year at the varsity level we had 2, you know, throughout the entire season. And, you know, it's really good when you can start reducing those in practice, and I'll talk about that more throughout it, because in a game I can't really control everything that goes on, but in practice that's a time as a coach where I can really focus on how I'm going to control that environment. So a couple things that are going on right now. So the IHSA obviously is heavily involved in making sure that the coaches are well educated on this test. You got to take this test and pass it. Our assistants have to take it and pass it. And it goes through a lot of the things that the doctors talked about. So we have to be educated on that. So good step in the right direction there. Coaches in the Ivy League, Buddy Stevens just spoke at Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill the other day, have eliminated across the Ivy League full contact in practices their entire season. So they are not hitting each other in the season. Now you hear a lot about tempos, thud tempo, you know, when you put shells on, how are you going to practice? Are you not having any contact at all? But it's interesting to watch, and I was able to in San Antonio in January to talk to both the head coach at Harvard and the head coach at Dartmouth, Buddy Stevens, about what they're doing. And it's a model that a lot of people are starting to follow. Like I said, how are you going to control that environment in practice? How much contact are you going to have? Here, you know, it's really the 50s and the 60s up in the top left, over to the 70s in the top right. You see the helmet come in with a different face mask, obviously, and so on. Down in the 90s on the bottom left, and then obviously today. The nice part, and I know parents are really interested in what type of equipment is the best. Riddell lives in all the community, talks to us all the time about what they're doing. Equipment takes us out to, they're right next to O'Hare, shows us their testing and what they're doing and how they're looking at concussions. And we're fortunate here. You know, we make sure we have the best equipment for our kids, but we make sure it's properly fitted. That was one of the things we talked about with USA Football. Make sure you get that equipment properly fitted. Make sure you get the best equipment. Our job as coaches to always be researching and looking at the new equipment as it comes out so that we understand what is best for our kids, make sure it's been tested correctly, get the information right. And you know, a big one is obviously cost, but I don't think you ever want to go cheap on equipment and put a kid in harm's way. So I would just encourage you to always look at the best equipment that's out there and research the new things that's coming out. I say, hey Ron, I really want to talk to you about this head across tackle and everything. He goes, Brian, don't ever do it. Don't ever do it. He goes, we thought it was a great tackle. We thought it was a great idea. He goes, it is a horrible idea. It actually puts that head in a bad position, low, it gets you in a really dangerous position. And he's like, you know, it's just what Joe Paterno wanted at the time, to be completely honest with you. And I said, okay. I said, well, throw that one out. That's probably not a great one. And he was talking more about the safety of the game. So I thought it was interesting that he talked a lot about that to me. He talked about the knee hitting the helmet. He talked about the helmet being down, the kid's eyes being down, all things that we as coaches, obviously, you know, that's the way I learned to tackle. When I played, that's exactly how I learned to tackle, and I remember that day. But I also remember this coach telling me, who I thought was teaching all these awesome linebackers at Penn State, to do it a certain way. And he goes, yeah, we taught it for a while that way, but we changed. Okay, so I knew right away, and I was like, well, I better rethink some of the things that I'm doing. Next one I'm going to talk about is heads up, which has obviously become very popular. When I was coaching at Elk Grove, I was the head coach for a couple years, and everybody in that conference really talked about this tackle. And when it came in, and USA Football made it really popular, you know, you could really see the benefits of, you know, making sure that the neck, the eyes to the sky, get in a position where you're not going to have any of that frontal head contact. And it became really popular. Coaches loved it. The one thing as a coach, don't shoot me for this, is we were wondering how many times in a game you actually can make a tackle like that. So we were like, okay, well, it's really safe, and we love that, but how realistic is it in the game all the time? So that was where some of the critics were on some things with heads-up tackling, was, okay, great tackle, great form, very safe tackle. You know, how many times does it happen in a game? So we still, at New Trier, teach heads-up tackling. We kind of specialize on it for positions, so the majority of our kids that do heads-up tackling are the ones that make those type of tackles in games, which are our interior defensive line. So our defensive linemen, our inside linebackers, players like that. Okay. My first year here at New Trier as the head coach, which is 2 years ago, I talked to my defensive coordinator for a long time, and I said, hey, you know, tackling is going to be the most important thing we teach. Hands down. You know, it's tackling, it's blocking, in that order for me. We have to be able to tackle the right way. Let's go over to Northwestern, let's sit down with Coach Fitzgerald, let's talk about the way they're tackling the things they're doing. What was the first thing they're doing? They're obviously doing this. You know, it's very, very safe tackle, it's a great tackle to teach. The next thing that kind of came up when I was talking to Coach Fitzgerald was hawk tackling, which is the next one, real quick, that you'll see here. And this has been made popular. Pete Carroll kind of made it popular, you know, through a YouTube video. We talked more about it. Well, I went to practice the week before our first week of practice over at Northwestern, and I watched everybody doing tackling drills. So half the team was doing heads-up tackling, and I looked over at the DBs for a second, some of the outside linebackers, and they were doing hawk tackling. And I was like, I just saw that video yesterday. I said, when did you guys decide that you were going to do this type of tackling? And he said, we actually decided last week we were going to try it. We're going to be open to trying it and do something different. So I watched all the drills they were doing, talked to my staff, and I said, hey, there's nothing wrong with trying something. I understand that maybe this is a more realistic tackle at times for certain positions on the field. So as a coach, we kind of adapted over time and said, well, some of our kids probably are going to learn one way and some of our kids are going to learn another way. But tackling is about confidence. It's about getting yourself in the right position. It's about the finish. All those things are really important to you. So we decided as a staff that we're going to teach those two different tackles. And we're going to make them really, our kids as confident as possible and finish all those tackles as best possible. That much in practice. So like I said, we really only last year, the live tackling was what, like 2 days, 3 days total of practice. We got something called Shadow Man. A lot of youth programs are using bags, and Dartmouth has got something now called the MVP. If you haven't seen it, you can Google it. It's a mobile device that actually moves like, I'm sure the guy that created it, his 2 kids at Dartmouth who love remote control cars, but they created this device that moves around. It's essentially a tackling dummy that moves around. So it's obviously a lot more expensive and it's hard to afford, but there's 3 different ways that you can obviously do what we're doing tackling wise. And I know Coach Pieper and other coaches, Coach Shane, what are rules we change, whether it's the way we teach things, communicate things to kids. The game obviously has given a ton to me. I know I love giving back to the kids in the community that are here. But what's next for football is I think a lot of great days ahead of us. I think we've had a little bit of a bump in the road with some things that have been a little ugly, but the reality is we're going to get through it, we're going to move forward, and I think there's great days ahead for us. But it's in large thanks to what the doctors, coaches, all around yourselves are doing, and thank you for that. I think it's really important.
On behalf of the Central Youth Suburban Football League, I'd like to thank everybody that came today. I'd like to thank all the speakers that came today. Thank you for your time. And I look forward to possibly doing this again and trying to do what we can on the youth level to keep football alive, well, and make sure that many years to come, our youth can take advantage of this great sport in football. With that being said, Anthony, you're going to wrap it up here with USA Football, and we should be out of here in about 5-10 minutes. Thank you.
Let's see is how, when you split your screen, how does it change from USA Football to your practices? Can you identify your matches? Can you identify what mismatches? What's your return to play policy? Every league should have one. If you don't, it's a big red flag. What's your emergency action plan? If something goes down, do you have a depth chart like football? You should have a depth chart just like you are as a coach. How far is it hospital away? If you're in an away game, how long does it take the ambulance to get there if it's not there? I tell this player, because I know a lot of is he building his confidence up? Probably getting a little pep talk, right? Probably shouldn't have thrown an interception or something like that. And then look at this coach. You know, what are we actually trying to tell the player? The consistent terminology leads to better teaching. Talk about contact. USA Football has now adopted practice guidelines. How many minutes you should practice at? USA Football considers stud and live action full contact on clocked hours. Full contact. So if you thud and you do live action as a youth, that is considered contact hours. You know, in USA Football, you have 21 drills that they can give you to show you how to tackle in different spots instead of head-on tackles. You can tackle from the side, get your number. They give you 21 drills. They're great. If you want them, I'll even send them to you. I've made them on PDF. You know, I drew up a whole thing. You have your curriculum library. It's phenomenal. It's $10 per youth coach. Youth coaches get $1 million liability insurance policy once all their coaches are heads-up certified. And remember, to go a 4-hour clinic with a master trainer like myself, okay? And you can do that anytime. We have a ton of them all over the place, okay? With the high schools, it's the same thing, $10. You can take that at the National Federation High School. The NFHS is now heads up. They give you 4 tests: a concussion test, a heat hydration test, the equipment test, and also the tackling portion with the roll tackle involved in it. It's phenomenal, okay? With youth coaches, this is what you get for your $10. I had to put this in there. Okay, who has Netflix, Hulu, or all the other social media stuff, right? You got that, right? That's like $10 a month. This is $10 a year.
In football, we believe in Friday night lights, Saturday afternoons, any given Sunday. And we believe in where all of that began. We believe heroes are made in the fourth quarter, and that every kickoff is a fresh start. We believe in pregame rituals and halftime speeches. We believe the best 11 will always be the 11 best. We believe in teaching fundamentals, building character. We believe in educated coaches, engaged parents. We believe in creating a positive experience for all and keeping the game fun. We believe in team. We believe in the lineage of Bryant, Rockman, Lombardi, and Dad. We believe you don't need a stadium or yard lines to have a game. We believe that even greater than the heroes on the big screen are those you give a ride to home from the game. We believe there is nothing more American than football, and that football gives us all something to believe in. Teamwork, confidence, pride. We are USA Football. We believe the scoreboard doesn't tell the whole story. We believe in the football family and that we can achieve a better, safer game together. We believe in football.